Hi, I'm Earl Butch Graves Jr., CEO of Black Enterprise. Thanks for joining me for another episode of From the Corner Office. My guest today is Bob Johnson, the iconic founder of BET and current chairman of the RLJ Companies, a diversified conglomerate with interest in hotels, private equity, entertainment, and auto dealerships. Our conversation today will primarily focus on two fiercely debated topics in which Bob has taken very strong positions. One, should African Americans receive reparations? And two, should Blacks leverage their vote by forming an independent political party? For over 40 years, Bob has earned the much-deserved reputation as a business trailblazer. First, he created BET, Black Entertainment Television, the first cable TV network for African Americans. In 1991, he took the profitable enterprise public, making it the first Black-owned company traded on the New York Stock Exchange. By 2001, Bob sold BET to Viacom for some $3 billion, and in turn, became America's first Black billionaire. He shattered other business barriers as the first Black majority owner of an NBA franchise in 2003. He also took two other companies public, RLJ Lodging Trust, a $3 billion hotel REIT listed on the big board since 2011, and RLJ Entertainment, a premium digital company listed on NASDAQ in 2012 and sold 6 years later to AMC Networks, in which he now serves as chairman. Two of his firms, RML Automotive and RLJ Equity Partners, can be found on Black Enterprise's list of the nation's largest Black-owned businesses. He has built his empire while amassing wealth for himself and legions of other African Americans. Now he seeks to share his strategies to enrich and empower the next generation of Black professionals and entrepreneurs. Bob, thank you for joining me this morning.
Butch, it's a pleasure to be here with you and delighted to have this conversation. And, your father's legacy has been a part of my life and a part of the life of probably every Black business person and entrepreneur in this country. And I'm delighted to know that you're carrying it on in the way that Earl would have wanted you to do. So I'm delighted to be with you today.
Well, thank you for the kind words. My father was, he could not have been prouder of the success that you led with BET and the other companies. He always pointed to you as, the ultimate entrepreneur who was continuing on to, drive wealth and find wealth for other African Americans. And so I know he is smiling from above as we're, engaging in this conversation today. Bob, before we got into some of the other things that I mentioned earlier, I think it would be important to share, if you would, a little bit about how you got started with BET in the first place, right? Because sometimes people think you just sort of woke up one day and you already had BET and not realizing, and I know the story, but I think that it would really be important to share with the audience, how did BET come out in the first place? Because you weren't even in the entertainment business. You were in a completely different area and then moved into business.
Well, Butch, I think what you're asking is what everybody asks about entrepreneurs. How did you come to that place and that point in time that gave you the opportunity or the epiphany to move into an entrepreneurial business opportunity? And that's really what it takes. I mean, I think entrepreneurs are born, not made, and you got to have that gene in you to make you seek opportunities that other people don't see, or to have a vision that other people don't have, and then the ability to sort of implement that. In my case, I was fortunate with no plans on my own part to be a lobbyist in the cable television industry in the late 70s and early 80s, when the industry was just emerging from retransmitting broadcast signals in the mountains and foothills into a programming service to target urban markets and urban consumers, particularly African American consumers. And I had the good fortune, and that's why I say that it's the right place at the right time is as much a part of being an entrepreneur as anything. I had an opportunity to meet a gentleman named John Malone, who was a cable operator who believed that cable should provide a diversity of entertainment choices for consumers. And I had the good fortune of talking to him about my interest in starting a cable network targeting African American audience. And Butch, as you know, targeting Black content was not new to cable or not new to me. Your dad did it with Black Enterprise. He recognized that Black entrepreneurs, Black businessmen and women needed to have their stories told. And Black Enterprise was that storyteller, but it was also making a statement to white America that we are contributors to the economic success and wealth of this nation. And we should be not only recognized for that fact, but included in the opportunity that comes from a free market economy like the United States. And then, of course, the greatest of all greats is John Johnson. Ebony chronicled the rise of the Black middle class, told stories about our achievements that other people weren't telling, the other magazines at the time, Life or Look, or some of the old Time magazine. But he said Black people need to have their stories told because ultimately one day they would become a part of our history. And as a result of that, it created the notion that there should be Black voices. And Black voices that were always on radio and R&B music. And of course, for women, we can't forget Ed Lewis and Clarence in starting Essence. So BET was really the old, as you say, the standing on the shoulders of these other pioneers who had gone before us. The difference is we did it with satellite technology and cable, being able to amass a audience from around the country of Black consumers that heretofore had not been possible with broadcast TV. And when I came up with the idea, which was a follow-on to the other leaders that I just talked about, I happened to talk to John Malone and say, John, I got this idea about a Black-oriented cable network called BET. He said to me, Bob, I could use that program for my cable systems around the country, and tell me how much you need to start this business. I told him I needed a $500,000, and back at that time, this is 1980, $500,000. And John, being the kind of strong supporter of entrepreneurs, strong supporter of people who have vision and are willing to work hard to implement that vision, he said to me, and in a short span of about 20 minutes, what I'm going to do, Bob, is I'm going to buy 20% of your company for $180,000, and I'm going to loan you $320,000. That'll give you your $500,000. But I'll tell you what, Bob, you're going to be 80% owner, and I'm going to be 20% owner. And John said to me, Bob, is that a deal? I said, John, that's a deal. What John Malone didn't know, or maybe he did, but he didn't say it. If he had said, Bob, I'll be 80 and you'll be 20, I would have said, John, that's a deal. Right. But that was the genesis of BET from the standpoint of the financial part of it. The programming part of it became, as we looked at how we can put content that appealed to African-American consumers that was unavailable on the basic broadcast networks or other cable systems. And we really focused on the culture of music and music entertainment, which has defined Black entertainment from the very beginning, from blues to jazz to gospel. And we delved into that and made that our calling card. And we did it at a time even when MTV was not even playing Black music, they were playing rock music. And from that, from music to sports, Black college football, to talk shows, to news, to sitcoms that were off the network but were available for reruns, we made a network that served the interests of African Americans. And we went on from that to do everything from cover the Million Man March, to have hosts talking to African Americans who wanted to make a point about issues that they were concerned about. That was BET, and that's how it began. It was fortunate that I was in the right place at the right time, from a technological revolution of satellite and cable, and meeting an entrepreneur investor like John Malone, who said, I believe in this because it's a business opportunity for an African-American entrepreneur to achieve something that would benefit himself and his community.
You know, I thought the story with John Malone was very interesting, and I remember you sharing this before, but if you would quickly tell, when he said, listen, come on out to Denver and meet with me. And I remember the story of when he said, okay, called this guy and he wrote a check and handed you the check, and you were concerned. You said, well, oh my God, what am I going to do with this check? But if you could briefly tell that story, because I thought it was very funny.
But you know this, and I'm sure your dad would know this. When an African American entrepreneur starts a business, we do not have the same capital nor the same access to capital that most white entrepreneurs have. I'm not saying Bill Gates had millions of dollars when he started, but he had a family, I'm sure, that had money that allowed him to leave school to work on Microsoft in his garage and build it. And he wasn't worried about where money would come if he failed. But with us as being African Americans, anybody supporting us financially is an amazing statement that causes us to think about, wow, how lucky, how fortunate we are. And so for me, in talking about this $500,000 check that John Malone gave me, keep in mind, I grew up in a small town called Freeport, Illinois, 30,000 people, 10% of the population was Black. So that's 3,000 people. I am sure, I am convinced that $500,000 check was equal to the total GDP of everybody Black in Freeport. So right. You can imagine how trembling my hands were when John handed me that $500,000 check, and I'm saying, "Oh my God, what happens if I get on the plane crashed, it's over, I go home, I lose the money or whatever." But that's what that was, and the other thing is that when John gave me that check, remember I went to a graduate school at the University of Illinois and teacher education, went to Princeton in international affairs. No Harvard, no Wharton, no Stanford in my background. But when I got the check from John, I said to him, John, I've never run a business. What advice can you give me? This is, of course, after I had the check. I didn't ask him that beforehand. Right. So he said to me, Bob, very simple. Get your revenues up and keep your costs down. And Butch, that was my MBA lesson.
That was your business school education?
That was my business school. I said, forget Harvard, forget Stanford, forget Wharton. I got mine from John Malone. And that's what served me in growing BET through the points you made. Publicly traded company, go private, take it again and sell it off to Viacom. All because of I had that support from somebody who believed in me. And I'll close this out by saying that John Malone never sold a share of his BET stock. He served as chairman for all 20 years that I owned the company. And when we sold the company to Viacom, John Malone's $180,000 equity investment, the debt was $320, so that got paid back. So his equity investment yielded him $800 million in Viacom stock. And that to me is an example of what African Americans can do if given access to capital, not only to generate value and wealth for themselves, but for the shareholders who believe in them. And I believe if there were more John Malones out there in white America, business people, there would be more Bob Johnsons, more Earl Grays, more John Johnsons, more Michael Jordans, more Oprah Winfrey's, all Magics, all down the line. And that's what I think I want to make a statement about. We need to focus on the tremendous potential of African American entrepreneurship and African American talent to help make this country great, and at the same time demonstrate without equivocation that African Americans can contribute to the economic success of this country and to their families.
No question. No question. Bob, a lot of people would have, you worked for 20 years, you took the company, you launched the company, and ultimately were able to take the company public, which in and of itself was a huge deal to have a Black-owned company listed in the New York Stock Exchange. And then 10 years later, you sold the company to Viacom. And what is still an historic deal, as you said, John Malone's he did pretty well in his ROI on the $180,000 he put in. But not only did he do well, but you did well, and so did many of your other employees do well. You created wealth for a number of different folks. But what's interesting is that a lot of people in your position, after having sold the company and done well and created wealth for African Americans and created something where you're delivering content to our audience that would have never had that content before, would have said, you know what, I've done my part. Now I'm gonna move to Bermuda somewhere and cut coupons and live on the beach and have done your thing. And you, as you said, I think it must be a gene inside entrepreneurs. That was not enough. It's like, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It wasn't like you were looking, you said, when I start this, the first thing I want to do is become a billionaire. I think it was you wanted to be an entrepreneur, and that still resided in you, because right after you sold it, you started RLJ and other companies. And, so talk a little bit about what's that gene in you, or that the impetus to continue on when you could have very easily said, listen, I've done my part. I'm going to go find the sand and have my toes walk through it. And even to this day, you continue to be a very aggressive entrepreneur looking for new opportunities.
Well, Butch, the thing that I think I think that's in every entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs seek to climb mountains and do things that other people have never done. They have this driving desire to be the first at making a contribution, building something special, and basically carrying out a vision that is part of their, as you said, their DNA. I mean, it's like Sir Edmund Hillary said, I see this mountain called Everest. I want to be the first. It's that kind of in you. I mean, you look at Bill Gates. Bill Gates made billions of dollars with Microsoft, but he said, for me, that's not enough, and he goes out and create one of the largest foundations. You look at all the other entrepreneurs, they just keep adding on to things that they're driven to create. And so with BET, I looked at it as, one, an opportunity to be a first in just demonstrating to the broad society, the white business community, that Black Americans, if given an opportunity, could create wealth for themselves, for their investors, and their families. And so one of the things I'm most proud of is that everyone who started with me in building BET, we immediately created an ownership structure, a participation in the wealth of the company for all of those people who started out. And they knew coming in that if the company went up to the top, they would rise to the company at the top. If the company had crisis and we didn't grow, they were in the risk business with me, the same as I was in the risk business with them. And I said, one of the most proud things I'm most proud of is that as a business person, not only BET, but in RLJ Companies and every company that I own, is we have a philosophy is that our employees will participate in the wealth of the companies. And we have created more multimillionaires, Black multimillionaires, probably than any other business in this country, because I fundamentally believe that people should share in the upside if they share in the risk, and if there is such a thing as a downside. And that's what I believe. And even to today, the one thing, again, that I'm most proud of is that today there are probably, Butch, and you probably know better than I do, there are probably 13 to 14 African-American CEOs of publicly traded companies on the exchanges. Of the 13 or 14, 3 of those individuals work for me. And of the 3, 2 are females and 1 is a male. And that is what I believe in doing, is giving people an opportunity to do things that I believe they can do. They believe they can do if they're given a chance. And that's why I look back at what my mission is, it's a combination of proving without question that given an opportunity, Black Americans can create value. Black Americans can manage wealth for investors and staff and others who participate with them in taking a risk and going after an opportunity in a free market economy like the United States. And so that's the way I've sort of come at it. So when I look at what we've done, what I did after selling BET, you're right. I mean, it would have been easy for me to take off and just say, I'm going to, relax in the sun and buy a boat and float around the islands. Right. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep demonstrating that with support from myself, other people could go on and prove out their ability to create value and create wealth. And that's why I've done it. So when I sold BET, I formed the hotel REIT that is today on the NASDAQ, run by an African-American CEO. It was run before then by a Black male CEO, Tom Baltimore, who's now running almost a $4 billion Hilton hotel REIT. So it's proved out to me that if we as Black Americans come together for a commonality of interest, commonality of cause, we can achieve things, and we need not be tied down to any particular group or organization. And that's why some of the things I'm taking strong positions on today, as you mentioned in your introduction, is because I believe that we have the potential to chart our own destiny. And the more we believe that, and the more confidence we have in that, the more we can succeed in proving without question the value that we bring to this nation.
That's a perfect pivot, Bob, to what some of these other subjects that I mentioned in the introduction. And I will say to you that, and I do know these numbers, but of the publicly traded companies, right, with Black CEOs, you represent approximately a third of all of them that are publicly traded companies. And within the S&P 500, which is just the 500 largest companies based on market cap, there are only 5 Black CEOs. Now, corporate America would make you believe that that's just a happy coincidence. Obviously, we know something different than that, right? That's not a happy coincidence. That is systemic racism at its worst, because those same numbers existed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and 15 years ago. Same exact number of Black CEOs within the S&P 500. And so the new numbers that have been added that are publicly traded companies have really come through people like yourself who have put people in place at companies, that publicly traded companies, and given them the opportunity. Well, let's shift a moment to these pandemics. Okay, there's the pandemic of COVID-19, which I'd like you to touch on for a moment, and then the pandemic of racism, which I think is really apropos in regards to the conversation about wealth building and creating opportunities. But let's just talk about COVID-19 for a second and what that has meant, because we've seen the diminution, unfortunately, of thousands, tens of thousands of Black-owned businesses who have literally gone out of business or gone up in smoke due to COVID-19. There is no insurance behind them. There was no, program that was going to help them per se. Talk a little bit about, what you saw when this pandemic of COVID-19 came in, and what you see has been the trouble that Black-owned businesses have suffered during this time.
Well, there are really two tragic parts of COVID-19. The one that's most obvious that everybody understands is the impact on human lives, the deaths that have occurred from COVID-19. And that's something that any virus, if it came about, would impact people. But the multiplier effect of that is that COVID attacked the people who were most likely, because of poor health and other morbidities, to suffer from a virus attack by COVID, which dramatized the point that disparities, whether it's in income, housing, education, or health, are going to be felt more dramatically by people who suffer from those disparities, and that's Black Americans. So when any kind of disruption in human life occurs, it could be a hurricane, as you witnessed Katrina. It could be a pandemic that we have now. Those people who are living on the edge, and the edge means bad health care, lack of access to emergency financing to solve problems, living in an environment that multiplies the impact of any kind of catastrophe, whether it's a healthcare or a natural catastrophe. Those things cause greater problems. And we in Black America have known this. It used to be, but you know this as well as I do, the old saying about the economy, when the white American economy catches the flu, we get pneumonia. You know, right. Because we are the ones that are going to be the last ones hired and the first ones fired. So when you look at what COVID has done to just human life, because of all the problems that are existing before the virus hits, and then you layer onto that the impact of COVID on small businesses, because many of these small businesses operate on a very thin margin. They're somewhat single proprietary business, you might call mom and pop, or whatever you call it, but they're businesses without access to liquidity. They're businesses without access to banking relations that have been in place over the years. They're businesses that can't dip back into friends and family money when they started, because of COVID, the friends and families are in the same desperate strait as the person looking for capital to revive their business. So clearly you will see a complete, I'd say, decimation of Black businesses post-COVID that will not have the money to revive themselves, let alone thrive. And in fact, one of the things that I've done is to begin discussions at two levels. I began discussions with the federal government, the administration, about a program, Butch, that would provide grant money to these businesses. And I've had the same conversations to some of the white business leaders that I know about providing a grant model of financing to businesses to help them survive and thrive post-COVID. And I say grant money because these businesses cannot accept loans. They're not big enough to attract equity, and without access to capital that they're not on the hook to pay back immediately, which they can't afford, because all it takes is one hitch in their business model, one drop off in a big vendor or customer, and they're right back where they started. And in fact, they're worse because now they have a loan. So I say a grant program, and my grant model works like this. And I've used this in talking to people to explain it. Let's say Mrs. Jones has a beauty parlor. She has 2 chairs for her beauticians to work. She's got a lot of customers waiting in line to get into the chairs, but that's her business model right now. That's all she's got. But if she had 2 more chairs, she's got 4. She can hire 2 more beauticians. She can begin to service her customers, get in and out. They become more comfortable with going to the shop. But she's generating additional revenue, what I call a path to profitability. But it's a grant. She doesn't have to worry about paying back. In fact, she doesn't even get the money. She tells this entity that I'm creating, I call it a special purpose vehicle. She tells us, I need 2 chairs, Mr. Johnson. We go out and buy her 2 chairs, oversee the install of these chairs, hook up the water and everything else and electrical, whatever she needs so her beauticians can work there. Let's say all of a sudden now she's got that. Now she's got 2 more revenue streams in those chairs coming to her without having any kind of borrowing requirement or debt service requirement of a bank loan. Because frankly, she could not pay off the bank loan. And you know as well as I do, the reason the money doesn't go to her, it goes directly to us to manage to make it happen for her, is because we don't want to put her in a situation where, let's say some tragedy happens to the family. So she's borrowed $5,000 for the 2 new chairs. A tragedy happens. Something happens in the family. There's a funeral in the family. She's got to help out. Her conscience is going to make her dip into, if that were a loan, dip into that loan fund for that emergency. It could be leaking. And all of a sudden, that money now is not going to generate return on invested capital or a path to profitability. So that's why we say, let's do grants. Don't trouble them with a loan, but take that grant money, and this entity makes all the, what you call CapEx investment in her shop to make her business more profitable. The return to the community is 2 new jobs created, a company that's now thriving, able to pay taxes. The community is getting more stabilization because the community is seeing the benefit of businesses thriving. End result is that's the way to help Black businesses return post-COVID. And I've been preaching this to the administration, to certain members of Congress, and to business people. That to me is a model that I can implement, and I think it can work if given the opportunity of the capital raised to do it.
Great idea. Great idea, because there's no question that that's, layering on debt for Black-owned companies that are already on a very thin line is in effect a death sentence, because the debt will then have there'll be a default rate, there'll be some other thing that will take place, and then there'll be no way for them to be able to find a way to, no matter how, they'll be digging themselves out trying to do things, and what we really need is, again, that access to capital, that investment, right? And it doesn't have to be something you give personally, because there's always stories that have happened with PPP now that have been obviously disturbing. Both the stories of publicly traded companies getting PPP money, and the Lakers and major franchise getting it, and small businesses not getting it, but at the same time, you've got to be able to put it into a place where that the money's going to go towards actually paying the employees, and it's not going to go towards, I went and bought a new boat, right? It's got to go towards.
That's what I call it. That's why it goes into what I call path to profitability investments. And these things are first of all, as you know, large companies do this all the time. We in the hotel business are required to continually invest in the structure and the renovations and the rooms of our hotels. And that's what you call property improvement program. And that drives, and these are revenue enhancements, because people like the hotel better, they come better. They come more often, stay longer. And so it's a normal kind of thing. It's just that Black businesses simply don't have access to the capital to do that. And if you layer a loan on a business that's operating on the edge, you're just doubling down on the likelihood of failure.
Yeah, no question. Let me ask you, let's talk about reparations, because this is something that has come up, after you've been talking about this beforehand, but it recirculated again after the death of George Floyd, right? Which seemed to be a trigger point for the consciousness of America to finally look up and say, you know what, it actually is it's actually worse than we thought it is, what have you. And so maybe we need to do something. Now, as Black folks, we have one eye closed, one eye open as we're looking at, because we think we've heard this story before. We've been, corporations immediately came out and made all kinds of mission statements about how they embrace Black people, they embrace diversity, made all kinds of promises of money that they were going to put towards social justice funds. And, all these things are out here, much of which, I say we have to find a way to hold corporate America accountable. And two, we need to be careful of the word diversity, because Bob, the word diversity can be a diversion away from Black, right? And there's been no one who's been a greater, who's benefited more from the word diversity or affirmative action, frankly, than has white women, right? Because when I look at who were sitting in these positions in corporate America, who have now moved into these executive positions and senior positions, it has not been Black men and Black women. It has been white women. And so I've always pushed to say, please do not let the word diversity become a diversion away from Black. Mm-hmm. You're focused squarely on Black. And what you've talked about is, hey, forget about all the other things you guys are making these promises and mission statements. Let's get to the root cause. You've had free labor of African Americans for almost, for 240 years, and then another 160 years of, under, let's call it under the market labor, whatever you want to refer to it as. But you had a bold initiative. You said, you know what? This has to be dealt with. And if we're not prepared to deal with it, we're going to be right back to, we'll have another George Floyd a year from now, and we'll be talking about the same exact thing. So talk about your idea of reparations for African Americans, why it makes sense, how it could be executed, because it's not as crazy. I mean, people are like, oh, that's crazy, it's crazy. Well, the people that are saying it's crazy are generally not African Americans, right? People are saying it's crazy. I don't think African Americans say, oh, that's crazy, please don't do that. But talk about the idea of it, how it would be executed, and why it makes sense.
Well, reparations is not a new notion. It's been paid for by nations to people who they have wronged, and they feel a need for the nation to atone for that wrong if it's ever to live up to its founding principles. And the United States is no different. We have paid reparations to Japanese Americans who we interned put into internment camps during World War II, because in our own sort of racist way, the United States thought that Japanese Americans living here, been living here for many years, would join the Japanese or be sympathetic to the Japanese if they invaded the United States. They basically defied the Constitution and said, you have to be locked up. The French, during the Germans, at the end of World War II, paid to the Jews, which went into helping establish the state of Israel, for the horrific murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazis. And they paid it. Many of the people who are still paying today for that reparations were never members of the Nazi Party, were not even born when the war ended. And yet they still feel this is a national atonement statement that they have to make. And so my argument for reparations is really twofold. Obviously, I believe that wealth equality is a necessity in a free market economy. Because if you can't have wealth equality in a country like the United States, it can never live up to its belief that we give everybody equal opportunity, particularly if that wealth was stolen from Black people over a 300+ year period. Labor is wealth. Just ask anybody who gets a paycheck and punches a clock. It's wealth. If you didn't have labor to transfer for money, you simply would not have any money. So white Americans took Black wealth and built this nation. And all reparations is saying, you, as you would normally do in a free market economy, need to repay us for what you stole from us. And that is as clear as day. If anybody in this country today, somebody came into their home and took some of their property and carried it away for their own benefit, they would go to court and say, I've been robbed, I got damages, the person swindled me, whatever it was. The court would say, you are entitled to damages. You're entitled to be paid, repaid. And everybody would accept that. The argument that, well, I didn't have slaves, or all the slaves are dead. Well, the one thing I say to people who say that, slaves may be dead, and maybe you weren't there as part of taking the money, but money doesn't die. As you know, Butch, money does two things. It circulates and it multiplies. So if there was money taken from slave labor, free labor, given to somebody else, that's a wealth transfer. And that wealth transfer just didn't end when the slave died. It didn't end when the person who took it died. That money went into investments in land, in property, in mining, in railroads, in shipbuilding, in banks, and every place else. And that money is still circulating today. I say this very often. You give me 20, 30 of the best accountants, I can ask them to do a forensic analysis of wealth in this country. You could trace a huge portion of wealth in this nation directly back to slavery. And so the idea of paying it. And then the second part of reparations is this, it's something I call admitting you are wrong, admitting that you did something deserving of making an atonement. White America cannot make an atonement. When people talk about American exceptionalism, in my opinion, they have it wrong. It's not that we are a great nation and we are a free nation. Are we a nation that can apologize and admit a wrong? Now, how do you admit a wrong in a nation that's built fundamentally on capitalism? The measure of capitalism is wealth attainment. How much wealth do you have? So if you really want to atone, give money. Don't give what has become, for me, and I've sort of coined this phrase for it, Butch. I mean, if there's anything that just gets me upset, it's this behavior of certain white people, and they're principally white people, on the liberal radical spectrum of the left wing of people in this country, that they fundamentally believe that by doing what I call placebo paternalism things, they can make it better for Black people. Placebo paternalism is knocking down Confederate statues. You can knock down every Confederate statue in this country. It will not do one whit to change the wealth gap between white Americans and Black Americans, where it's 10 times for whites against Blacks. You can change every script in Gone with the Wind. You can cancel the Duke of Hazzards. The Dixie Chicks can change their name to Chicks. It's not going to do one darn thing to close the housing gap between Black and white Americans, where Blacks are living in apartments, renting, whites are living in houses, getting a mortgage deduction, and Black people are paying the same taxes. All of these announcements in the Wall Street Journal about we're going to give money to this program and that program, these programs do nothing to create wealth and access to capital for Black people. You can make all the movies and show them all on Netflix about everything that happens to Black people. You don't have to do that. Black people know what's happening to them. You don't need somebody to give a 4-minute introduction to Gone with the Wind to say it was really worse than this. We already know that. And that's what I call placebo paternalism. Giving you something that do nothing for you to help you, but they think it makes you feel good, but when it really all it does is make them feel good. And
Right.
So if you really believe you want to help Black people, don't pull down Stonewall Jackson. give $14 trillion over 30 years in reparations to every black, 40 million black souls living in the United States descended of slaves. Then you are really looking yourself in the mirror and saying, I'm going to give to black people what I value most, and that is wealth equality. No black person is going to eat better. No black person is going to get a reduction in diabetes because you tore down a Confederate statue. Nor will they get better because the Dukes of Hazzard is not on TV. These are the things that this mentality of placebo paternalism is what white people are willing to do. They will stop right up to the point of saying, hey, we'll do all of these things that make us feel good, and we hope they make you feel good, but we really don't care. But if you ask us for $350,000 over 30 years to bring us to wealth equality with the median white family, no, we can't do that, and we won't support that, because if we do, that may not get us elected, but we'll support a study. How much studying do you have to do to know that white people rob black people of their wealth in the form of slave labor? That's a sentence. That's all you need to know. And that continued through Jim Crowism, that continued to housing discrimination, job discrimination, access to wealth discrimination, health discrimination, and every systemic discrimination you could think of. And you can't come to the conclusion that, well, maybe we do owe them that. And the Germans did it, you know? And there's no reason why we can't look ourselves and say, aren't we better? Or at least as good as the people of Germany? No. But you ask a white person, can you do that? And you do it by the taxes. And it's like we do everything else. You know, this money comes from taxpayers. And if you want to make it progressive so the rich people pay more and the poor people pay, and the people with less income pay less. You know, I spread it out over 30 years. It breaks down on a monthly basis. It breaks down about $11,000 a year of money over 30 years. And to me, it's not so much, it's the money, but more importantly, it's white America admitting what is the thing most precious to us is wealth, control, access to capital control. Well, give what is most precious to you to us because you owe it. Do not give us a torn down statue. Do not give us the cancellation of TV shows with cops or TV shows with Dukes of Hazzard, or worry about the damn flag taking the battle flag of the Confederate out. That will never, never put food on the table for a single parent household where the mother is struggling every day to feed her kids. None of that will matter. But yet, white America says, look at us. We put an ad in the Wall Street Journal saying we're giving money to this group. But they never ask black people where the money should go. They just give it. And more importantly, they never say, oh, and here's the person you should call to sit down and talk about where this money should go. They already make up their mind where the money should go. They don't ask black people. Right. They just say, this is what we're gonna do because it makes them feel good. That's placebo paternalism.
Yeah, it is absolutely, and I appreciate what you laid out, because I have thought about this and talked about this forever, and is that there's a number of different diversions that try to move you away from what's most important. And I had one of the CEOs I was speaking to last week, he asked me, and he wasn't trying to be funny or glib about it, he said, what is it that, because he felt himself as being very open-minded, he said, what is it that black people want? And he said it in a way that made it, and I was kind of taken back by it. I said, what do you mean, what do we want? I said, at the end of the day, what we want is, we want jobs, we want promotions, we want access to capital, we want opportunities, we want a level playing field. I said, that's it. We don't want these other things. I said, changing nicknames of teams and taking shows off the air and painting streets and all the other things that they do to make people feel better, or even using this term, is another term that's been created by, sort of very liberal, trying to do good white folks, which is unconscious bias. And I said, who came up with the term unconscious bias? Unconscious bias does not exist. Unless you fell on the pavement and hit your head, that's unconscious. But if you are looking at me and making it more difficult for me to move forward, that's not unconscious bias. That's conscious.
Yeah.
So don't use the term unconscious bias. It doesn't even exist. There's either you're conscious or you're unconscious. There's no such thing as in between.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Bob, and I appreciate all the time you put in, because this has been a great conversation, and you've really laid out what I think is a model for how this can be done, and really wanting to have the honest conversations, because white folks do need to ask Black people, where should the money go, right? Because giving money to, not that we should not support our civil rights organizations, and not that we should not put money to work in philanthropy and doing other different things, but building a playground in an impoverished area does not necessarily help to move the country forward for Black folks in regards to creating wealth. Put computers in every Black kid's hands and give them a device with internet that they have access to, so that they can compete with their peers. That's something that does that. But I want to go to this point about the, forming our own independent political party, because you've talked about this and said that we've Black folks have sort of blindly supported the Democratic Party, and not that you were trying to push people towards the Republican Party. You were saying the Republican Party hasn't served our interest. The Democratic Party, if you look at the respective administrations over the past 200 years, you can point to Democrats and Republicans, and the one thing that's consistent is that Black folks have never really have never leapt ahead, right? We just on the margins have been improved. Talk a little bit about your idea about an independent party for Black folks and representing our interests.
Well, Butch, the idea of an independent party is not necessarily my idea. It really had its roots in the formation of the Congressional Black Caucus when it was founded in about 1971. The first members who were elected to Congress formed the Black Caucus, and they enunciated a philosophy that said this, that Black Americans should have no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. And to me, what that says is, we do not have to be an appendage of one party and ignored by the other. We can become our own leverage between the two parties and chart our own destiny between the two parties by collecting the voting bloc power of 40 million Black Americans now, I don't know how many it was at that time, to say we will vote based on our own permanent interest, not on the interests of the Democratic Party, not out of fear of the Republican Party, but out of what we think is our best interest. And because we are a voting bloc, if we move this way in one election cycle, we can determine who is the president of the United States. We move this way in another election cycle, we can determine who is the president of the United States. We can become the balance of power in this nation. And that to me is saying, why not have an independent third party? And just keep in mind that to all people who are viewing this, is that there's nothing in the Constitution that says this country must always and only have two parties. There are other free democratic governments around the world that have a multi-party system or a parliamentary system, as they do in the UK. There are multi-parties in France, there are multi-parties in Germany. There's absolutely nothing wrong with having a multi-party. And since Black people vote as a bloc, we're the best to form a party. We're the only people in this country who vote almost 98, 92, 95% of our vote to one party. Hispanics don't do that. Hispanics split their vote almost even between Republicans and Democrats. White women voted for Trump more than Hillary in the 2016 election. White women can divide their vote. White men divide their vote. We only lock our vote with one party and becoming an appendage of that party. And as a consequence of that, over some 50 years, because back in the early part, blacks were in the Republican Party going all the way back to Abraham Lincoln up to Richard Nixon. But as a result of that, we have become so much an appendage of the Democrat Party that they have started taking advantage of us. And the perfect example of a party that's taking advantage of you was voiced by none other than the nominee for the Democrat Party. When he told the brother on the Breakfast Club radio show, that even if you think about voting for Trump against me, in his words, you ain't black. Now, if you want to be insulted by white people, if you want to be, agitated by a white Confederate statue, in my words, you cannot be more insulted than to have a white man who wouldn't even be close to the nomination. Had you not gone out starting in South Carolina and carried him all the way to the nomination, to have that white man look you in the eye through a radio voiceover and say to you, how dare you even think about voting against me? And if you do think that, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna decide you ain't black. This is a 70 plus, damn 80-year-old white man telling you that. And we get agitated when somebody says all lives matter, but we don't do anything when a white man tells you, I'm gonna decide if you're black. That's going all the way back to Willie Lynch, divide the light-skinned black from the dark-skinned black, divide the field hand from the house N-word. That is what we have accepted. And to me, it is the worst thing that Black Americans could do to themselves and allow themselves to become an appendage of a party that basically says, I have no respect for you because you're not going anyplace. I've created so much fear of the other guys that you're afraid to go over there. And if you do, we'll call you out. And on the other hand, the other guys say, we don't care about those folks because they so locked up into one party, there's nothing we can do to convince them to change. And as a result of this, we are powerless. Because when it comes down to what we really see as our permanent interests, we get none of it. Because if we had those things in our permanent interest, we wouldn't have all the levels of black on black crime and all the levels of health disparities and housing disparities that we've had. We've been voting for the Democrat Party forever. But housing, white people have 70% more of housing, we have 40%. White people have $170,000 of median income, we have $17,000. Now, why is that? It's not because we don't want better housing or more housing, not because we don't want more incomes or equal income. It's because the system does not work in our permanent interests. And as a result of that, we're gonna lose either way. You get another Trump 4 years, we lose. You get another Biden 4 years, we lose. Now, if you put yourself in that situation, that is the dumbest position that 40 million people could ever put themselves in when they have proven their ability to determine who the president or the nominee of one party will be. I simply do not understand it. And the only thing I can say is to riff off the lyrics of my favorite song, Redemption Song by Bob Marley. we have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. That's where we are. We are in mental slavery, and we will be there until we decide that we can control our own destiny.
Bob, well said. Very well said. Well, I want to thank you, Bob, on behalf of Black Enterprise and behalf of corporate America and more specifically on behalf of Black America for being a leader and taking bold positions and things that we really do need to think about. And we're going to continue to push that. I support everything that you're doing, Bob. Continue to stay young and be the inspiring entrepreneur that you have been to millions of other young African American. And we will be there to cover you and to watch. And I really want to join you and hope you will join me in trying to make sure that we hold corporate America accountable towards the things and the promises that they've said, so that we can put Black-owned businesses and Black people in a better position to enjoy the luxury of being able to build and gain and pass on wealth for many generations to come.
Well, Butch, I just want to say I want to congratulate you on this program that you're putting out and making available. I think it should continue to be, and I know under your leadership it will be. It should be thought-provoking. It should tell it like it is, and it should bring people to discuss items that are oftentimes pushed under the rug and not talked about. And I know that you, based on your DNA from Earl, you will have no problems in saying, when you come on my show, it's going to be a real talk. So be prepared. So I hope I lived up to what you're trying to do.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have.
And believe me, no doubt, we will continue to have a voice that needs to be heard. And I look forward to coming back at any time you want to extend an invitation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Bob.